Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the regular board meeting of the Cowichan Valley Regional District for Wednesday, April 24th. My name is Ian Morris and I'll be chairing the meeting today. And I would just like to, before we get started, recognize that our meeting is taking place in the territory of the Coast Salish people. And with calling the meeting to order, I would call for an approval of the agenda with one note that we'll be removing CR2. Director Marsh.
Before we approve the agenda, I wonder if you would like to acknowledge that it's Administrative Professionals Day. And
as a matter of fact, I've got that under control. Thank you very much,
Thank
Director
you.
Marsh. Would anyone like to move the approval of the agenda as amended? Moved by Director McGonigal, seconded by Director Sebring. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Those opposed? Motion carries. Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item 2 is the minutes of the regular meeting of April 10th, and the recommendation before you is that the minutes of the regular board meeting of April 10th, 2019 be adopted.
Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Acton. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? There's none opposed. The motion carries. Any business arising?
There is none, Mr. Chair.
Item 4 on the agenda, public input period. Is there anyone in the gallery that would like to provide input to the board on matters on our agenda today?
Hello, I'm Sheila Bell Irving, and I'm from Shawnigan Lake, and I was frontline on the toxic soil dump and handed an injunction by that man. And I would like to have a say about the soil. Oh, I guess I still have it. Anyways, the CVRD has had open houses, and we've put notices in the paper, and there were public meetings. And if none of the truckers showed up to say anything, then they kind of missed their timing here. And it shouldn't be a matter of we give them another chance when they haven't actually shown up when they had the chance. They could also speak to directors at any time through emails like we all do. And this is just another stall tactic. And today I sat at the South End Road and counted 26 trucks coming in an hour. 7 of them went to the south end of the lake, and the rest went up to Goldstream Heights. That's just on Shawnigan Lake Road. I can't tell you how many are heading up the Malahat and going to the Bamberton site. Now, the problem we're having here is it's not just the dirty dirt. It's all the dirt that's coming into our watershed. We live in a conifer watershed. Now, conifer watersheds don't make soil. They have fir needles, so it doesn't make a lot of soil, which is why their roots are exposed and you trip over them when you go for a hike. So what's happening here is we're getting all this foreign soil that's being brought in that is full of nutrients and things that are not in our watershed already. And what's happening is that we are getting milfoil growth, we are getting algae growths, we are having problems with our water and our shorelines, et cetera, because we have so many nutrients coming in. Oak Bay should not be in Shawnigan Lake. DND should not be in Shawnigan Lake. Port Moody should not be in Shawnigan Lake. And it's gotten out of control. There are landslides happening and burying fish-bearing trees or creeks. There's so much damage being done by the trucks just driving on the roads. I mean, we all saw the damage that was done as they were traveling from Nanaimo barging area to Shawnigan. They had to redo the whole of the Duncan Road. If anybody remembers, that all had to get repaved. That was because of the thousands of trucks that were coming in while my community was standing in front of the gates. So we need to get control of this. And I've read the letters from the truckers, and most of them say we do need to have some regulation. So please, let's just get on with the regulation and start to get control of what's being brought into our community before it stays out of control. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I'm one of the Philsight owners. My name is Frank Ryan. We live on top of the Malahat, 841 TransCanada. And I'm not as enthused about the propaganda we're hearing on this. We are not SIA, and I mean we're bringing in clean fill. Before we started, we went to CVRD, made an application, and we have a written agreement to proceed with fill site on conditions. We've got a biologist and geotech that work with us on the site, so we're not breaking any rules. But this bylaw, it seems to be coming from basically a lobby group. It's not representative of the whole community. And if this thing is passed today, it's going to impact construction in every municipality in the South Island. I mean, it's fine for people to say, don't impact my immediate neighbourhood, but NIMBYism is never an answer. We've got applications to develop our property, and it's been sitting for 3 years now in front of CVRD, and I'm concerned right now there's not enough planners to handle what's coming in. Applications have been prioritised, and everybody pays for their applications, so there should be no prioritisation. I mean, it's questionable, how prioritisation is done. So we need to have a proper planning department that's operating efficiently before this kind of bylaw can get dumped on top of them. They have enough work as it is to handle. But we have an application, like I said, for 3 years, and we've got a clear laid out agenda of what we intend to do with our property. And it's not to pollute. We live on the property. There's 2 families, like 3 generations of us live on the property, and we're immediately downhill from that property. And we're not bringing in polluted soil. Everything we get is it's inspected at source. There's professional engineers and biologists involved in it. There is, I admit, contaminated soil coming into the valley, but it's not coming to any sites that are governed by people who are on this table. And that's all I'll say about it. I mean, you guys know who it is. So anyways, I think this bylaw should be scrapped until we get a chance to speak to it and I mean, have reasonable input. I mean, it's fine for a round table to have existed in quasi-secrecy, but we made an effort to speak to Rob Conway last summer.
You've got 30 seconds.
Okay, that's fine. But Rob Conway said once this came back from the various ministries that he would get together with us and have proper consultation. That never happened. Rob has left the building, so we're left with no consultation, and that's just not fair. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, Bernie Yerlich, Mill Bay. That this bylaw will affect construction negatively is really nonsense. I've read letters that said that the average house price in Victoria will go up $4,000 to $10,000, and that the affordable housing per unit will go up $75,000. This is insane. If you calculate how much fill is removed from building a basement, for example, for a 2,400 square foot bungalow, it's no more than 600 cubic meters. So that the costs involved are really very modest, perhaps no more than $400 or $500 per housing unit. I've also read that the Ministry of Environment looks after contaminated soil movement, and this is complete nonsense. If you look at the soil relocation permits over the years, you'll see that it has plummeted by 90% in year 2005, 2006. In addition, the ministry identified 12 landfill sites in the South Shawnigan region in 2012, sampled and tested 8 of those, and all 8 of those sites exceeded the allowable limits for hydrocarbons and metals. In addition, there's a comment that this would greatly interfere with depositing soils and landfills, but this is only the case if you have illegal dumping. So, for example, we have some fill sites that grind garbage, and this garbage is incorporated into the landfill site. So this is clearly, there will be an impedance on activities like that. And many of these landfill sites deposit silt into the creeks that feed Shawnigan Lake, resulting in huge silt deposit in Shawnigan Lake. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next.
Hi there, Mike Ferguson is my name. I own a large acreage off of Stebbings Road, just down from the SIA site. I operate a clean fill site. I reside on the property. I'm a family man. I have children. We drink our well water that's regularly tested. The biggest thing here, guys, is that as a stakeholder, a landowner, a resident of South Shawnigan Lake, I was never formally notified of this whatsoever. So, you know, the consultation, the input, I mean, all I got for an opportunity for input was Thursday of last week at about 3 o'clock. That's what I got. And we're talking about my entire life savings, my children, their futures. We are talking about a large investments here, guys. And all I ask is that you guys give the stakeholders the opportunity to be heard and to allow for input. The same as it would be if you guys were standing up here. Your houses were on the line. Your children, your futures were on the line. You guys would want some input. That's all I'm asking for here, is give us some input here, guys, because what's being suggested in a proposed Class C permit is absolutely outrageous. I mean, you are going to effectively bankrupt people here. So, you know, if this thing is adopted the way it's written right now, guys, I'm basically going to be in the middle of a development. I'm developing an equestrian property here, okay? I am going to be in the middle of a development where I can't develop my land. So essentially, the property is worth little or no value. I have a problem with that, guys. And I have a problem with you know, being given the opportunity to speak 1 or 2 business days before this this proposed bylaw is to be adopted. I mean, I'm a Canadian citizen here, and I haven't been given any notice whatsoever for input. And this is going to effectively impact my family and my children. So,
You have 30 seconds.
okay, so that's pretty much all I had to say. I really do hope that you guys put the shoe on the other foot here. If it was your family, your life savings, your houses, we would give each other the courtesy of input as to how this is going to impact one another here. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Dale Herb, Shawnigan Lake. I didn't know we were going to talk today, but I do have a couple comments since last time I was here. You all witnessed kind of what went on, and I appreciated your time. But I guess I really want to comment on little things like, do you know at Shawnigan Lake, the south end of Shawnigan, you know who has #1 license for the water? Me. Do you know who drinks the water out of there? Me. Do you want to know who tests the water? Me. Do you want to know who cares about it? I do a hell of a lot more than a lot of people because I'm drinking water. My family does. So it's important. When I have people come onto the bridge and they're going under the bridge and putting mushrooms in the river, why aren't we doing something about that? Because what has a mushroom got to do with it? And it's okay to do it. Well, why was that? That's not a species that's normally there. I'm sorry. But since the last meeting, my biologist was there, and I was told that my fill site, which is done by one company, and the fill site itself, every ounce of dirt is in there, it's filled, it's dirt, it's totally clean dirt. And I was told that my fill, the minerals going from that actual fill site is causing the milfoil, and the milfoil is being fed by my soil. Well, I'd like to see the water samples to prove that. My biologist really wants it, because we know it's not true. I was told, well, I'm just playing you. I'm playing you. Are you kidding me? Some people know I've been 14 years trying to protect. I bought a piece of 200 acres of property to turn into park, and I've been 14 years, hundreds of $1,000s, and getting zero. You think I'm upset? I'm really pissed off because I'm trying to turn it into park. I spent the last 3 years with the Basin Society actually trying to walk all my property to determine what's good property, like gold, the river. How many people have been to the waterfall on my property? You guys need to see the waterfall. It's a beautiful, no one knows about it. Well, it's on my property. I'm trying to do that for park, but I've been told, I've been playing you, I'm not doing nothing. I totally disagree with what you're doing in the area. I totally disagree with what you're doing on my farm. Are you kidding me? I've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars. I've got people complaining that I just built a house for my wife that's got MS and she's had a stroke and she's really sick. I'm sorry I built a new house for her. I'm sorry I had to rip the house down. You
You've
think
got
I
30
wanted to?
seconds.
It's so wrong. Why don't we deal with the facts? I think everybody's interested in, there's gotta be something to protect. I want it protected for God's sakes. But if we're not gonna do it properly and we don't care about anything else, I'm sorry, but, and I apologize, but I'm really upset. Like, this is my future. I built a house for my family and now I'm thinking, I just finished the house and I'm thinking of selling it. Can you imagine? Telling my wife that?
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'm Cliff Evans from Shawnigan Lake, and as you know, I attend most of the meetings here. And I think that the CBRD has done an excellent job on drafting this soil bylaw. They've been working months on it. They've had open houses, and they've advertised in the paper. And I've gone to the open houses, and I've gone to the meetings. And I'm sorry, I haven't seen this gentleman at any of the meetings. And I think that that you've done the best job you can. 40 other regional districts have soil bylaws, and I think it's time we need one because the browning of the Shawnigan watershed and other watersheds in the CBRD is just tremendous. The forest in our watershed will not put up with it. And I was really happy to read through some of the support material and see that most of the truckers even recognize that there needs to be some kind of a soil bylaw. And we know it's not perfect, but at least it's a start. And I think we have to start on this journey, and we need everyone to give input to make it a good bylaw so it's fair to the truckers, it's fair to the homeowners, fair to the CBRD, and most of all, that it's fair to our watershed and environment. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Seeing no one else getting up to the mic and we're nearing the end of our period, you will be the last person during public input period.
Hi, I'm here to talk about something else, actually. The variance application for 1905 Wooden Road. By now I've stood in front of this area committee twice and told our story only to be turned down. I'll try and keep it short because I know we don't have a lot of time, but I'm 28 years old, worked in construction since I was 17, and finally been able to realize my dream of building my own house. Learned everything I could about the industry and currently work as a project manager in Victoria, doing heritage restorations, custom homes, multifamily buildings. So building a 1,200 square foot house on an acre parcel that most people mistake for a cabin should be pretty easy. The only reason we're here is because of a surveyor error. To say our surveyor was negligent would be an understatement, given that our house is 21 feet south of its intended location and 66 feet east. We found this out after the house was framed, roofed, wired, plumbed, windows installed, most of the house wrap finished, and we were 8 weeks from moving in. I emailed my local area representative to seek advice on the same day we found this out. It's been 3 months now, and I never got a response. In the first board meeting I went to, I was told that although we had a sad story, we better start looking for a solution. I explained that the solution was either to move the house for about $90,000 or tear it down and walk away from our savings. I'm here today in a last-ditch effort to get this variance approved and avoid going into crippling debt over an encroachment on an unbuilt and long-forgotten road allowance. I spoke with the Ministry of Transportation, who was willing to grant us an encroachment permit, and they actually explained that they had no intention of building the road and it may never get built. given that there's another route available and it would be easier and cheaper to build should anyone need to access that future lot. I understand there's setback bylaws for a reason, and if you've read my letter attached to this application, you'd know that we did everything possible to work within those boundaries and follow the necessary steps to properly site the house. I also know the variance process exists to relieve undue hardship from people trying to build on challenging lots, and in some circumstances to address mistakes made by contractors during construction. One of the problems with the report on this property is that it does not reflect the series of events that led to this problem, and it does not address the rural nature of the property. As it is today, our house sits over 100 meters from the nearest neighboring structure. It's been incredibly disappointing to see the lack of empathy from our representatives when we've spoken about the issue. If you were in our shoes nearing completion, only to find out that a registered professional made a mistake that was going to cost you $100,000, I can only imagine the steps you would take to prevent such an unjust expense.
You have 20 seconds.
The last meeting I spoke at, I was told by the majority members to figure it out. This from the people that are here to act on the community's best interest, and as far as I can tell, there's no negative effects of approving this application. An argument could be made for setting precedent for future development. Given the requirement for a survey during the application process, this variance can be clearly distinguished as a surveyor error. Thanks again for looking at this today.
Thank you. To the next item on the agenda, we go to number 5, delegations, and I understand we have John Alexander on behalf of the Island Equipment Owners Association. Mr. Alexander,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board.
you have
My
10
name
minutes.
is John Alexander. My address is 26 Bastion Square. I'm appearing here today on behalf of my client, the Island Equipment Owners Association, and their members, and I want to speak to the soil bylaw that you're considering today. I understand for adoption. I have provided you with a written outline of the points that I wish to make on behalf of my client. I want to emphasize 4 aspects of what's in that documentation. To be clear, as several people have observed, my clients, who include both those who bring soil into the CVRD and those who own and operate fill sites, do not oppose regulation of soil deposit in the regional district and agree that it's a necessary step for the CVRD to be taking. The landscape, if you will, has changed quite dramatically in the last several years. It's interesting to see Tom Anderson back here. I know years ago, when he was dealing with the previous government in office in Victoria, was told the CVRD would not get a soil deposit bylaw approved that had reference to soil quality. We know that government has changed. We know that that new government's approach to these matters is very, very different. And in a few minutes, I will make reference to what that new government is doing on their own accord. But be that as it may, you now have the authority you need to proceed. No one is objecting to that happening. It's a matter of getting it right and getting it right in the right time. So the first point I want to emphasize is impact. There's no doubt that staff has probably considered the costs being imposed by the permitting process in terms of fees, et cetera, based on what it will cost you as a district to administer this program. I've seen nothing that indicates that there's been an actual assessment of the actual cost to those who will have to operate under the regulation that's being considered now. That cost is being realized now that the requirements, the detailed requirements in the bylaw, have been assessed and analyzed by qualified professionals. If you look at section 12 of the proposed bylaw, you'll see 2 full pages of very detailed requirements to even apply for a permit, which include qualified professionals in 4 or 5 different disciplines, including surveyors, hopefully not the surveyor that this gentleman just referred to. But if you look at the cost to the people who are involved in this industry, it is very, very substantial. And I've not seen anything where this board's had an opportunity to consider that aspect. $100,000 a year is the estimate that Mr. Erb was given by his qualified professionals to comply with a Type C or a Class C permit requirement every year. The Shawnigan Research Group following me is going to point to some old disasters and some 6- and 7-year-old data. Again, what's missing from that is the fact that the regime has changed. You now do have the ability to deal with soil quality, and the province is dealing with soil quality at the same time, and those new regulations are just in the process of coming in. The second issue is notice and time to adapt. While one of the gentlemen a few minutes ago disputed the cost to the average house of this kind of regulation, that's not really the point. The point is this, that my clients, this industry, relies on being able to bid jobs and complete jobs on fixed price contracts. And we're not talking just about house contracts. We're talking about things like the Capital Regional District sewage project. We're talking about things like the Mackenzie interchange project, where these people have committed, based on the current regime, to a fixed price contract that's going to run for the next year, 2 years, sometimes 3 years. And to have a bylaw which comes into force a month and a bit, 27 days after its adoption, 27 working days, will be June 3rd, where the Class C permits are required. Now, I know that you're also considering an enforcement policy that would suspend the need for complying with the bylaw. In my submission, that is a poor way to regulate. People should know whether they have to comply with the bylaw or not that they're subject to some subjective policy that says that the application may be suspended, may be in whose decision and who's going to make that call. Some people will have it suspended, others won't. Even if you were to apply that 90-day extra days on the 27 working days they would have from now till then, get 5 different qualified professionals to make that application, do all the studies, prepare all the reports, present them to the board, and for the board to adjudicate them. Because don't forget, the Class C permits are going to be adjudicated by you. We're going to be right in the middle of the summer when that 90 days runs out, or at the end of the summer. You'll have maybe 1 meeting in July, 1 meeting in August. Staff estimates there's between 5 and 12 C-class operations right now that have to be permitted. You're going to be spending 10 hours at every one of your meetings between now and then adjudicating Class C permits. How is that going to work? In my submission, it's not going to work. There's not been enough notification, and more time is needed even if you do adopt the bylaw now, and you have provisions in there that would allow you to adopt the bylaw and then set the time at which it will commence application. Engagement, public engagement. When you adjourned this matter last time at your March meeting, at that same meeting, you adopted your new public engagement policy. You embraced a new way of engaging the public that talks about informing, consulting, involving, and collaborating. Now, could my clients have done more? Of course, someone can always do more. The point is this, they did engage with CVRD staff, and there is a history, well-documented history, of proposals for CVRD staff to interact with this stakeholder group, and meetings that were canceled, postponed, presentations that were agreed to and didn't happen. The fact is, there has not been the consultation. It's not, in my submission, a wise thing to say, well, it could have happened. In my submission, you should recognize that for whatever reason in the past it didn't happen, but this group has valuable input. This group wants to engage. You want to start a whole new regime, and in my submission, you don't want to start that regime in a adversarial situation. Your staff, your enforcement staff, would far prefer to start that new regime and that new relationship in a cooperative fashion. Having worked with these people, gotten to know them, found out what works and what doesn't, and moving forward together collaboratively. That's what your new engagement policy is all about. Consult, involve, collaborate, get people on board. That is what they are seeking to do.
You've got a little over 2 minutes.
All right. The last thing I want to emphasize is the duplication. A big part of the document I sent to you last week set out what the new provincial changes are that are coming, and all of the provincial government's publications indicate that's coming as early as mid-2019. I've seen nothing that assesses this bylaw against the new provincial regime, which is changing dramatically. One of the speakers was correct when he pointed at that old data up to 2013 about the number of soil relocation agreements. They were ignored in the breach, for sure. A totally new regime, which requires notification, which involves local government, which requires notification to local government and First Nations for all soil movements. It's going to change. Much of it is very much duplicative of this bylaw and of the cost that the people who operate these facilities will have. Regardless of what you've done in the past, I'm asking that you dial back the adoption of this, leave it today, have a look at that, have some engagement, talk to the province, find out how you can streamline it for your own good as well as the good of the operators, to save your own costs as well as the costs of the operator. This region accomplished a lot with the current government. I think we know why. One of your previous members of this board has a lot of influence on what goes on in the regional district. She's moved mountains. Tom Anderson doesn't hear anymore from the provincial government. Talk about quality, you'll never have a bylaw. It's totally changed.
You've got about
So-
30 seconds.
What we ask today is that you not adopt this bylaw. If you are nevertheless going to adopt this bylaw, that you include in section 25 a reasonable period to obtain the Class C licenses like you have for the Class A and the Class B. The June 3rd date, 27 days from now, 2 meetings from now, is inappropriate and should go at least to early 2020. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions for the delegation? Seeing none, we'll call Edward Wiebe forward on behalf of the Shawnigan Research Group.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. My name is Edward Wiebe. I'm a Shawnigan Lake resident and a member of the Shawnigan Research Group. First of all, as I was looking at the complexity of my presentation, I realized that 10 minutes is not quite enough. Respectfully ask that I be given another 5 minutes to my, added to my 10 minutes. Is that all right?
Director Acton? Is there a seconder? We have a seconder. Is that simple majority or unanimous? Require unanimous vote of the board. Call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? Unanimous consent is given. You have 15 minutes starting now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I was looking at the agenda and I was heartened to see the amendments to the original bylaw number 4236. It'll be incorporated into soil deposit bylaw 4236-2018, and then the amended bylaw given a third reading and proposed to be adopted today. I'm very hopeful and optimistic that this will happen and that we'll have finally have soil deposit bylaw in place in our CVRD district. Okay, let's see. Okay, thank you. I'm here to stress the importance that the CVRD deposit bylaw be adopted today. After all the time and delays, let alone the costs to get the bylaw to this point, it may not be perfect, but it should be adopted now, and if problems arise, it can be amended. There are over 40 soil deposit bylaws in BC. These bylaws are approved by the Ministry of Environment, and I understand that some other ministries that get involved. The CVRD bylaw has been vetted by MOE and is not materially different than the Capital Regional District's bylaw. Okay, let's,
I'll stand here.
Go ahead.
okay. Okay, so this bylaw does not restrict business, but it is to provide us a level playing field against all the other bylaws within our Vancouver Island area, so that we have the same protections that the Capital Regional District has, and yet business can be done here. The vast majority of business owners are honest and work within the norms of what is good for the community and the environment. This bylaw is to protect us in the CVRD against the very few irresponsible operators. We need to take control of what is happening in the CVRD, and we're counting on you as representatives to make this happen. In 2012, a study was done by Cindy Mays of the Ministry of Environment and Sally Rudd of Compass Resources Management investigated the soil dumping in the South CVRD area. You can follow that study on the BC Ministry of Environment website, and a map of this area is shown here. On this map, there are 12 places that are noted as dumping sites within the South Cowichan area. 9 sites were tested for contamination. 8 sites showed contamination, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, chromium, copper, sodium, and more. 1 site of this publication, as of this publication, was still under investigation. 3 sites were not sampled. Now, as far as I know, no action to date has been done to remediate any of these sites. So in other words, anything that came into the CVRD stays in the CVRD, and that's not good. I'm not basically here to talk about contaminated soil. On the next site, I'll show a graph from the MOE that shows a big change in 2004, 2005 as to the number of soil relocation agreements permits were given. Now this is the graph, and on the side it shows how many relocation permits were given per year. It's anywhere from about 40 to 100 per year, and then all of a sudden around March of 2005 it dropped down to almost 0. And it makes you wonder what happened in 2005 that changed so drastically. Well, my thinking is that the MOE stopped doing their due diligence and moved the problem over to the next layer of government, which is you, our local government, the CVRD. So from 2005 to the present time, it's been pretty well anything goes in our district. Many other jurisdictions have soil management bylaws in place. The CVRD has worked many years on many draft editions of bylaw and many legal perusals on this final bylaw. Does it compare well with other soil management bylaws? I think so. Is it comparable to the Capital Regional Districts? Yes, I think so. So I think we should adopt it now. Now is the time to do it, that we have a even playing field as far as our neighbors are concerned. The magnitude of soil coming into the CVRD has increased dramatically. A low estimate is 100 to 300 trucks plus pup trailers in any given weekday. So the question is, where is this coming from? What is the quality? Is it clean? Where is it dumped? Are there records available? I don't know whether there are any records available. It's certainly not easy to track down what's happening in our own area. The next part of this the display is going to show pictures. Pictures show much better than words. There's a series of pictures taken by members in our group, and this is a story of a mudslide into Van Horn Creek. You can see the amount of mud that has come down from a slope. This happened in the early days of April 2017. This shows a larger area of where the mud came down from. Van Horn Creek was actually rerouted by about 40 meters from its usual course, and the mud just filled that whole area. The owner of the property down from this site has a house about 100 meters from where this slide occurred, and she was thinking it was an earthquake in the middle of the night and found out differently in the morning when she got up. Here's an example of an effort to clean up the mud and to get the Van Horn Creek to go back to its original course. It took weeks and weeks to do this. This is a picture of the trees that were inundated by this mudslide. You can see the light gray line on the trunk, and that's about 2 meters up from the original ground level.
Edward, you've got about half of your time left.
Thank you. Here we see some of the things on when that soil was moved. There's an oil slick there. I don't know why that's there, but there it is. This is a picture of the silt that Van Horn Creek was running for weeks after this incident. This is a picture of Shawnigan Creek by the bridge on Souk Lake Road. Van Horn Creek runs into Shawnigan Creek and then on into Shawnigan Lake. And this overhead picture shows the plume of silt coming into Shawnigan Lake from the creek. This happened with Van Horn Creek, but it also has happened many times with unexplained sources. So the next batch of slides tell a story about what happens to the back of the dumps, and typically the entries of the main roads to these other dumping sites are narrow, and the dumping happens out of sight from the main roads. As the sites fill up, the pile of soil slides down the slopes, sometimes onto neighboring property. The question is, what else besides clean fill is going in there? Here's a picture of one of the piles that is on one of the sites. Another picture, and again, and again. And this is leaching brown water coming off of one of the sites, and that leaching runs pretty well all year round, and it goes right into Shawnigan Creek and then into our watershed. So here is a picture of another site that had a mudslide. This slide went from on the property of this place along a forestry road, and the skiing pole shows how it's slowly coming down the slope. Just a few meters into the forest from that spot, there's all kinds of watery brown and different water coming into the forest. At this point, there are some more images that are made from overhead, and I'll let Russell speak to the rest of the images here.
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, my name's Russ, just a member of the community. Care about the place we live, but I got nothing to gain personally. But I feel compelled to talk about what I would consider the great unfairness of things. And some of the sites you'll see in the next pictures, just to give you a brief snapshot of the area in general. This is kind of one area we're going to look at. It's in the Stebbings and Shawnigan Lake Junction, off to your bottom left of the picture. That was it in 2004, the area. Then in 2010, things picked up. We got mines. We have 2 operators also in the bottom right-hand side of the screen using it as a fill site. Then in 2016, we got a significant increase in the amount of fill being deposited on site. We have also had some issues with literally grinding garbage. Here we have a pile of demo box waste. A concerned member of the community sent these to me, and we have on the right the material ground up. I'll show you an expanded view of this site. As we see in 2016, then we see it fast forwarding to 2017. The area that Ed was referring to was the on the left-hand side of the picture to the right. That is Van Horn Creek. Again, another picture of that site. So I've been following this issue for over 5 years. I've been patiently waiting for this opportunity, and I'd like to thank all the members of the community for their input and support. I'd also like to thank the association and their representative for their input. But with that being said, I'm strongly in favor of this bylaw, and to say this is a necessity is an understatement. Soil deposit, like Ed said, as removal bylaws are used by local governments throughout BC. We've got Squamish, Lillooet Regional Districts currently using. We have the Capital Regional District. We have the Fraser Valley Regional District.
You've got about 90 seconds left.
Okay. The vast majority of the fill, if not all the waste fill, is coming from the CRD. And if the industry would like to continue their current practice of waste fill removal, deposition onto the CBRD, then why is the Capital Regional District not being lobbied in the same way that the CBRD is being lobbied? In the way, the bylaw is a necessity, but slightly a lesser equal to the Capital Regional District's current bylaw. Furthermore, this bylaw is actually cheaper than the CRDs in terms of both cost and the regulation. To be clear, I would like to encourage them again to engage with the Capital Regional District as their solution lies south of us. Cowichan Valley is entitled to the same protections of the environment and the communities within their borders that the CRD is established. To say otherwise is a double standard. This is the equivalent of me to just dumping my yard waste over the fence onto my neighbor's property.
30 seconds.
I took a half a day off work to be here. I have come here with, again, no agenda. I have nothing personal to gain. I just care about our neighbors, my community. I care about doing the right thing. What our community sees in the current level of waste fill is a great unfairness. And I encourage the board to vote in favor of this bylaw, and I thank you for your time for letting me speak.
Thank you very much. Look to the board. Is there any questions for this delegate? Director Acton.
I just have a comment. I would like to thank Russ and Ed for coming here today. I'd also like to thank all the community members who worked behind the scenes continuously, writing letters, taking photos, monitoring sites, and to all the familiar faces who made it here today, thank you for coming. And thank you to all the Shawnigan Lake community members who are here because of the unfairness and because of the love of your community. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm looking for questions for the delegation. Director Marsh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you to the delegation. I'm curious, the orange leachate, which we saw in several of your slides, has it been tested, and do you know what it's composed of?
I don't think it has been tested at any time.
There has been tests of one particular area. It's called the Godfather Site, Lot 21, directly adjacent to Lot 23. It was ruled a somewhat by Andrew Weaver in 2015. Dr. Andrew Weaver, he tested the material and found that it had high levels of above drinking water standards.
Of whatever's in that leach?
Yeah,
orange
it's
leachate?
essentially acid rock drainage, and it's, what it is it's a byproduct of, one, it can be natural, but it also can be unnatural as a byproduct of soil and oxidization of that material leaching out through water.
And it contaminates the water?
It raises the pH level of the water to an unsafe level.
And was the water at the bottom tested to confirm that?
That's a good question I don't know the answer to.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further questions for this delegation? Seeing none, I thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
So, as the prerogative of the, oh no, I've got one other thing to do, which, thanks to Director Marsh for reminding me, I'd like to just note for everyone here and everybody watching at home that today is Administrative Professionals Day. And there are a number of those that provide us with great support in the regional district, and those that work in other levels of government and organizations throughout the Cowichan Valley. And I just want to note that they help make this world run a lot smoother, and I'm very appreciative of those in this organization and our municipal partners and other organizations throughout the valley, and just like to just take note of that. And yeah, let's give them a hand. We've got the prerogative that I spoke of. Well, we've got everyone here. I am going to vary the order of the agenda, and I will ask Mr. McDonald to come and bring forward SR1 and SR2. And following that, it is my intention to bring forward B7 and B8 to following the staff reports. So with that, Mr. McDonald, what do you have for us?
SR1 and SR2 are for information only,
Oh,
and the reports are in front of you.
of course, they are. Let's let everyone catch up and get into the right field on their iPads. Okay, so SR1 and SR2 are both, well, SR1 is for information, SR2 is got a recommendation. Does the board have any questions for staff on either of these items? Director Sebring.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I think we should be dealing with SR1 first.
And I'm good with, I mean, SR2, the motion isn't on the table, so that's fine. I guess my question would be to our CAO. You know, we have heard from some delegations here today that there wasn't enough opportunity for public consultation. We've heard from others that there was. I understand that we're going to have an institutional bias to say we did it right, but objectively speaking, Mr. Carruthers, what's your take on what we've heard here in terms of could we use more community consultation, or are you satisfied that we've given every opportunity?
Mr. Carruthers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When this initiative first, we embarked on investigating a soil deposit bylaw, we had actually had quite an aggressive public consultation process. We went out into the community, had opportunities for both residents as well as stakeholders, property owners, affected parties to provide input, as I say, as we started this process. This has been a long process. We've been at this for 2 years. The original bylaw had gone forward to the ministry for review and approval, subject to ensuring that there was no conflict with Ministry of Environment. Report came back from the Ministry of Environment requiring us to go back and to review the bylaw to make sure there were no opportunities to conflict with MOE regulations. We just recently received approval from MOE advising that they had determined that our bylaw is not in conflict and that gave us approval to proceed. We have not done a formal, per se, public consultation process following that Ministry of Environment approval. However, I know that we have had numerous conversations and numerous opportunities for stakeholders, property owners, to contact us. And in fact, the bylaw that you have in front of you has been amended from the previous iteration as a result of that feedback and input that we've received from some of the property owners, particularly with regard to the value of some of the deposits amounts that we were prescribing in the bylaw, as well as the enforcement policy is also a result of hearing feedback from the community around the need to have some time to reply. As any of these cases, you're going to have differing opinions as to whether there was sufficient or not sufficient consultation. I am comfortable that the folks had an opportunity to approach our staff. Our staff have certainly, and it's all included in your package, we've gathered all of the input, considered that input, made changes regarding some of the areas that we felt could be altered. But at the end of the day, I think this really comes down to the board's decision as to whether they're comfortable based on the information that staff have provided with regard to opportunities for consultation.
Follow-up?
Yeah, two sort of, if I could. I'll just combine them. That way I get them all into one.
That's pretty slick. Go ahead.
Thank you. What's before us today has been amended from what was there last time. Did the amendments require approval from the MOE, and did we get them?
Mr. Carruthers?
No, they did not.
They didn't require.
They were
we didn't get them?
administrative in nature, totally within the CBRD's purview.
And the second piece is with respect to the 90 days, and that actually goes to the next item on the agenda, the sort of relaxed enforcement.
Hold that for the next
Okay,
item.
I can hold that.
Thank you. Director Nicholson.
Should we at all be concerned about things falling through the crack when Mr. Conway left on the consultation front? Would there have been, could we have missed touching bases with people?
Mr. Chair,
Mr.
I
Carruthers?
can't speak to that. I mean, certainly there has been some issues with personnel changes, and Mr. Conway did leave, and Mr. McDonald has taken over the file. I can't speak to whether things fell through the cracks. All I can say is what staff have done to date in terms of, and it has certainly been the desire of this board to see this bylaw in front of them, and in fact it had been previously on an agenda for the board's consideration, and at my direction that bylaw was taken off of the agenda to allow us more time to incorporate some of the feedback that we'd received from stakeholders. That would be a subjective question as to whether anything fell through the cracks.
Follow-up?
And then my other question was this issue of the paper that the Ministry of Environment's come out with on soil. Has that been reviewed in the context of our thing, and is it relevant to this issue right now?
Mr. Carruthers?
Certainly, there may be changes. I mean, we could be in a situation now where we've had an active soil deposit bylaw. If those changes do come into effect and there is the need to make amendments for alignment, that is certainly a possibility, and other jurisdictions that currently have soil deposit bylaws are going to be in that same boat. We don't see, particularly given that the ministry recently reviewed our bylaw, we got approval from the Ministry of Environment to proceed, and they gave us no indication that they saw any conflicts with what, and obviously they were proposing regulation changes. My suggestion to this board would be that when and if those changes come into effect and we determine that there are some misalignments or duplication, that we would be coming back to this board and we would be making the appropriate adjustments, just like any other local government would be doing caught in that same circumstance.
I've got Director Acton, you're passing. Director Kuhn?
Did we follow a similar procedure as other districts did when they introduced their bylaws? Was there an obligation on our part to apart from having publicized public meetings, would there have been an obligation maybe to get in contact with some of the corporations or companies that haul or that get soil deposited. I'm a bit concerned that maybe we are taking a step that could backfire, and we've had legal disputes, and I'm getting sick and tired of legal disputes. So, anyway, I wonder if we fall. Did we cover all the bases, or did we leave something out that maybe we should consider?
I'll turn to Mr. Carruthers, but I believe that question's answered in the staff report. Mr. Carruthers?
Well, what I can say through the chair to Director Kuhn is that I believe that we have followed standard process in enacting a bylaw. We have certainly taken a cautious approach. This has been 2 years in the making. I'm sure there's many that would have preferred this to have been a much quicker process. We have done our due diligence in terms of consulting with the province. We've certainly had our legal counsel on numerous occasions review and work with us in terms of drafting the bylaw. And as I said, although other than at the beginning stages of developing the bylaw where we had a formal public consultation process, there has been a fair bit of interest on the part of local stakeholders. They have contacted us. They've been corresponding with us. Our staff have been answering questions. And as I said earlier, to the point where the amendment that's in front of you is actually reflective of some of the input that we have received from some of the affected parties. So again, a subjective question as to whether that was sufficient consultation.
This is for information only. I will, seeing no other hands, proceed to SR2, and this actually has a recommendation. Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item SR2 is a staff report from the Inspection Enforcement Division regarding the soil deposit bylaw enforcement grace period policy. And the recommendation before you is that the soil deposit bylaw enforcement grace period policy, as attached to the Inspections and Enforcement Division's April 5th, 2019 staff report, be approved.
Turn to the board. Are you moving that, Director Sebring? Seconded by Director Acton. Director Acton.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question to the caveat that says an extension to the grace period will be of the sole discretion of the general manager. I just would like clarity on the thinking behind that, and is that normal practice that we use for other enforcement issues?
Mr. Carruthers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, as we entertain a new bylaw like this, a new regulatory bylaw, I don't believe it is uncommon to allow the general manager to use discretion. I think it's in the board's interest to allow some flexibility in terms of as we go through this process. Anytime you enact a new regulatory bylaw, it affects individuals, it affects the stakeholders, property owners, and so I would suggest that having that flexibility is important. As conditions, situations emerge, we can adapt to that, and the intent of this bylaw would be to work with the property owners, to work with those affected by this bylaw, to make the transition as easy as possible, given the rigor of the bylaw. And so I would suggest that would be appropriate to have that discretion. As we do with other similar development permits, different approvals that we have within the regional district, we allow a certain latitude to the general manager.
Thank you, Mr. Carruthers. Director Sebring.
The question I was going to ask earlier, and it goes to the staff report, which says there are numerous sites actively accepting soil in the CVRD, which will require the Type C permit. And that's what's precipitating this 90-day delay beyond June 3rd. You know, we heard from one of the delegations that if we're not careful, we're going to wind up with a bunch of stuff before this board at our presumably July, August, and September meetings. Can we define the word numerous, and can we speak to that assertion that was made that at the end of the day we could be buried in applications for extensions and those kinds of things here?
Mr. Carruthers.
Thank you, through the chair. That's certainly a possibility. You know, there has been a strong desire to see this bylaw implemented. And, you know, we looked at what we felt was a reasonable time. You obviously heard from a delegation today that contradicted that and felt that that wasn't enough time. But given that we have approximately a dozen fill sites and not sure, you know, how aggressively those property owners are going to pursue their permits and their licensing, yeah, absolutely. But that is the peril of enacting a bylaw like this. At some point in time, you're going to have to deal with all of those applications, and it could be a very busy summer dealing with these applications.
Would it be, if I may, for a follow-up, I mean, I know staff is recommending this 90 days, but somewhere I'm wondering whether it might not be prudent to extend that 90 a little bit to say 120 or perhaps, I mean, I know it's at the discretion of the general manager, but just wondering.
Mr. Carruthers?
Very good question through the chair from the director. You know, this very much is in response to a significant public policy issue in the community, and as you've heard from some of the delegates, something that's been, people have been anticipating for some time. It is certainly the board's prerogative, as they're considering this bylaw and this policy, to you know, consider that some additional time may be warranted. Staff are simply trying to find a balance between a bylaw that works and that's effective and also addresses the needs of the board. And if the board, based on what they've heard and the information in front of them, feel that some more time would be warranted, that is entirely the board's prerogative.
So just a suggestion, I'm comfortable with the recommended period of time that the staff has come forward, and Director Sebring brings up a good point, and I don't think our staff would be at all afraid to come back to us in 45 days and say that an extension of this grace period would be appropriate. I think it's important for everyone to know, and I don't know how long it's been, but I don't believe the CVRD's had much of a reduced summer schedule in a number of years, and that given the budget constraints and the likes, that we pretty much work through the summer anyways. So I don't think there's any reduced schedule for us to be able to not only do our regular business, but to address any applications that may come forward from here. So given that, I think we've all got a pretty clear idea of what's at stake here is moving forward on the concerns of the community and balancing the concerns that some of the stakeholders have. So looking around the room and not seeing any other hands, we have had this duly moved and seconded. And I am looking to call the question now. Would anyone like the resolution read again? Seeing none. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? There's none opposed. The motion carries. Next order of business is, I believe, the bylaws. B7 and B8. Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item B7, the recommendations before you. Number 1, that third reading of CVRD bylaw number 4236, soil deposit bylaw 2018, be rescinded.
Just that portion now?
Yes.
Call the question. All those in favor? Oh, pardon me, sorry. Yeah, I was looking for the other. Moved by Director Sebring, seconded by Director Acton. Any discussion on that? Vote to rescind. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? I see none opposed. The motion carries. Next portion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That CVRD bylaw number 4236, soil deposit bylaw 2018, be amended in accordance with the April 24th, 2019 Inspection and Enforcement Division's staff report.
Moved by Director Acton, seconded by Director Nicholson. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? There are none opposed. The motion carries. Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That CVRD bylaw number 4236, soil deposit bylaw 2018, be granted third reading as amended.
Moved by Director Acton, seconded by Director Staples. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That CVRD bylaw number 4236, soil deposit bylaw 2018, be adopted.
Moved by Director Smith, seconded by Director Salmon. Any discussion? Director Acton.
I would just like to say that this is probably the 7th time that I've spoken to this bylaw, even as an alternate, so I'm pretty confident and excited that we're here today passing this bylaw.
Seeing no other hands, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? There's none opposed, the motion carries. Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr.
B8.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item B8, that CVRD bylaw numbered 4274, municipal ticket information authorization amendment, schedule changes, bylaw 2019, be granted first, second, and third reading.
Do we have a mover? Moved by Director Yanni Denardo, seconded by Director Salmon. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? There's none opposed. The motion carries. Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That CVRD bylaw number 4274, municipal ticket information authorization amendment, schedule changes, bylaw 2019, be adopted.
Moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Marsh. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Those opposed? There's none opposed. The motion carries. Let's take 5 minutes.